Resident Evil 8 is undoubtedly a game that stood out from the rest. Specifically, its introduction to folklore creatures was something we have never seen before in a Resident Evil game. And among all these folklore enemies, there was one that stood out from the rest, and that enemy is none other than Lady Dimitrescu. She took the world by storm and easily made it to the top as the most popular Resident Evil character. Resident Evil 8 is officially a year old now, and believe it or not, there were a lot of secrets and hidden details that the game never revealed about the fan favorite Lady D. With that being said, here are 20 things you never knew about Lady Dimitrescu. Number 1. It seems that a lot of people to this day seem to mispronounce Lady D's name. With the U on the end of the name, it seems that it would be pronounced as Lady Dimitrescu, but in actuality, the U is silent, and it's actually pronounced as Lady Dimitrescu. This is evidenced during a Resident Evil showcase that occurred last year.
Another demo is coming this spring. Something tells me it won't involve casual tea time with Lady Dimitrescu.
Number 2. So early plans for the game had Mia Winters being Lady D. The developer of Resident Evil games revealed that they initially used Mia's model to create Lady D. They tried to dress up Mia in Lady D's dress and a hat, but she was not intimidating enough. So the developers tried enlarging her character model, which ultimately led to the creation of Lady Dimitrescu. Number 3. Lady D was once a jazz singer, likely before her mother Miranda implanted her with the Mutamycete. She performed under the stage name of Miss D, and she was also part of a band called the Paul Boys. Number 4. Resident Evil has introduced many tall characters in past installments, like Mr. X in Resident Evil 2 who was 6 foot 11 inches, also Nemesis in Resident Evil 3 who was 8 feet 7 inches. Believe it or not, Lady D surpasses the height of both of these enemies and is ranked as the tallest Resident Evil character in the series, with a height of 9 feet 6 inches. It was also mentioned that her shoe size is twice the size of a regular woman's shoe size at 17.4 inches. Number 5. So the 3 sisters that accompany Lady D aren't actually her real daughters. Once Lady D and Mother Miranda implanted the virus into the dead bodies of the 3 women, the virus evolved into a fly-like organism that fed on the 3 girls and later took those forms. Furthermore, Lady D formed a bond with the girls and adopted them, and thus becoming their mother. Something interesting that's also worth mentioning is that early plans had Lady D controlling dozens upon dozens of sisters. However, after trial and error testing the game's tempo, the Dimitrescu family was ultimately decided to just include the 3 daughters. Number 6. The name Dimitrescu has a history behind it. Unsurprisingly, this name can be traced back to Eastern Europe, especially Romania where Transylvania is located. Romania also happened to be home of Vlad the Impaler, the brutal warlord who inspired the infamous Count Dracula. The name Dimitrescu could also very well be referring to Demeter, which is a Greek goddess of harvest, grain, and fertility, which also makes sense since Lady D rules over and terrorizes a village of farmers. Number 7. One of the benefits of Mother Miranda's virus infection is that her appearance is the same as when she was first infected. Her aging process stopped at the age of 44, leaving her with the beauty she once had years ago. Number 8. According to the art director of Resident Evil 8, Lady D was inspired by a real-life serial killer named Elizabeth Bathory, a Hungarian noblewoman who allegedly tortured and murdered hundreds of women in the early 1600s. According to the legend, Bathory bathed in the blood of her victims because she believed it would rejuvenate her. The puzzle with the 4 statues that has a pool of blood could also very well be a reference to Elizabeth. Number 9. Lady D and her castle are considered a callback to the well-known Castlevania series. The concept of a vampiric boss was originally popularized by the series, which is largely set in Dracula's haunted castle full of monsters. However, what makes Lady D's castle unique is that it is populated only by women. The director of Resident Evil Village stated, "With Lady D as the cult's guru, we have created this hierarchy of women. Men have their blood drained by these women, so you could say that it is the opposite of Dracula." Number 10. Alcina Dimitrescu is one of the 4 leaders of the village, and thus she has equal respect as the other 3 leaders. However, Dimitrescu believes she is above all the other leaders, especially Heisenberg. Furthermore, she is a great leader capable of standing in front of others, but she only bows down to Mother Miranda. She even accompanied Miranda on her many experiments. With that said, it's safe to assume that out of the 4 lords, Lady D is Mother Miranda's favorite. Number 11. The dagger that Ethan stabbed Lady D with was always a mystery, as the story behind it was never revealed in the game. However, through a piece of concept art, we learned that the dagger was once used by a man long ago to try and kill Lady D. This man was most likely a prisoner in Lady D's castle. It goes on to say that Lady D sealed the dagger away in a tower with his corpse because it was still a threat to her. Number 12. Although both Lady D and her daughters were both humans that came in contact with the virus, they have vastly different abilities and weaknesses. Lady D's mutation largely centers around her regenerative abilities and her need to feast on the blood in order to maintain them. However, the three sisters are all essentially reanimated corpses compromised of hordes of bugs. Because of their composition, they undergo cryobiosis and low temperatures, therefore stopping their metabolism and leaving them susceptible to any damage Ethan deals. However, Ethan wasn't as lucky when fighting Lady D, as her entire boss fight happens outside the castle in the cold, and yet she clearly didn't mind the low temperatures at all. Number 13. So this is more of a fan theory, but I thought I'd throw it in here. So after you kill Donna Beneviento, Carl Heisenberg, and Dr. Moreau, they all seem to crumble and fade away. What's interesting is once you kill Lady D, she never seems to fade away. So this raises the question of, could she still be alive? Honestly, it doesn't really seem too far-fetched since Lady D brought so much attention to the game. So could we potentially see Lady D return in a future Resident Evil game? Looks like we will just have to wait and see. Number 14. It's clear that Lady Dimitrescu's clothes are inspired by early 1900s attire, but the specifics of the era change depending on where you look at her body. Her dress is one of the most obvious throwbacks. The long draped dress that gathers at an empire waistline is indicative of an upper-class 1930s attire, especially when partnered with the long sleeves and the giant black hat. Number 15. Among the many inspirations of Lady D, another inspiration comes from a villain in the Full Metal Alchemist anime series named Lust. Interestingly enough, both Lust and Lady D are voiced by the same Japanese voice actor. Number 16. In Castle Dimitrescu, all manner of servants were used to tend to Alcina and her daughters. The fear of being punished for any action was always there as the people who had done wrong were sent to the dungeon. Experiments on all of the women always ended up in multiple failures. These women would end up becoming the enemies that Ethan fights in the castle. The men, on the other hand, are seen before entering through the front door, all set up in the garden used as scarecrows. Number 17. Another inspiration for Lady D was a Japanese internet urban legend called Hasaku-sama, an 8-foot-tall evil spirit with a wide-brimmed hat who attracted young male victims, mimicking the voices of their loved ones. This Japanese urban legend is also known for luring little kids out of their home by sometimes calling their name in a familiar voice, and sometimes crying for help. Number 18. In the game, there is one secret death animation where Lady D beheads Ethan. Number 19. Believe it or not, Lady D actually isn't a vampire. Lady D had a blood disease that was carried over to her mutated form. This disease caused her to need a constant supply of blood. Number 20. A YouTuber by the name of Slippy Slides was able to move the camera around to see what Lady D does when she's off camera, and surprisingly, in many instances, we can find her randomly roaming around the castle. And there you have it. That is 20 things you never knew about Lady Dimitrescu. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.